For me, it began in 1992 with an ending. I was 5 years old and happened upon a comic shop advertising the death of Superman in its window display. From that moment forward, the Man of Steel has been my favorite character, and now on this podcast, I'm exploring my fandom and examining the creative visions that have shaped the last son of Krypton across media for over 80 years. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I am your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me for the first of two episodes examining the classic 1950s television series Adventures of Superman is my dear friend and returning guest, Rich Roney.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
There's no one else I would even dream of doing these episodes with. You and I have been talking about Adventures of Superman on almost a weekly basis for months now.
Yeah. I would say for your listeners, because this is fascinating, I would say about 10 or 11 or 12 weeks ago, obviously Anthony had invited me to participate. And I'm thinking, Anthony, it was probably one weekend in late September, maybe early October. It was a rainy, raw Saturday. I figured, I'm going to get a head start. I'm going to start watching some of these DVDs. And quite bluntly, I figured I'd just watch, maybe one or two and refresh my memory. Coincidentally, I watched about four of them, and then I called you. And totally by coincidence, you likewise had watched. And to your listeners, I really wish you could have heard the very first season 1, episode 1 was Superman on Earth. And I had never seen that episode, even though it was probably 65 years plus old. But we had such a jazzed discussion, and it was such, they didn't skimp on the production, or they did a good job weaving a lot of good stuff together in a 25-minute episode that showed the whole, decimation of Krypton and the transplant, the rocket to Earth, and then even the rearing and raising of Clark from a child to becoming the reporter for the Daily Planet. We were so jazzed in that. It was lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, it was really a lot of fun. And I'll be honest, I felt some pressure with this recording because we've had so many really fun chats. And I'm like, boy, I really hope we can recreate it for listeners and viewers on this podcast. But I'm confident that we'll be able to. But it really is funny. I mean, yes, the serendipity of both of us beginning our rewatches at the same time. But even before that, when I first started mapping out this podcast series, very early on, I knew that this was something that I wanted to cover at some point. And, you were immediately the first person who came to mind because I knew you had grown up watching Adventures of Superman. You were a fan of it. And I remember one of my earliest conversations with you about this podcast series. And I think it was as soon as I brought up Adventures of Superman, my next breath, I was going to ask if you wanted to be the guest. And I think before I even got there, you volunteered.
I cut you off.
No, but I'm so glad.
I cut you off. And listen, if I may, to interrupt for 30 seconds, one of the best bosses I ever had said, when you're going to write a paper or you're going to do a communication or give a presentation, the most important thing you have to say that first. So first and foremost, I want to express my thanks to you. To your listeners, I figured I'd do this off memory or I'd watch 3 or 4 episodes. But Anthony, I got to tell you sincerely, the discussions we've had, I've done a lot of research offline. I've checked stuff on Wikipedia, on Google. I've watched many more episodes than I planned. I've derived so much enjoyment out of this. So I really have to thank you. It has intensified my appreciation for the character, and it's intensified my appreciation for George Reeves as an actor. So I tip my hat to you. I thank you. I've derived tremendous joy out of this. And candidly, to your listeners, especially given the fact that the whole country's in the throngs of a pandemic, it's helped me kind of keep my positive energy up. So thank you. So I'll get into the show whenever you're ready to go. But I wanted to express my gratitude.
Well, I very much appreciate that, and I reciprocate the feeling. I mean, honestly, and you and I have said this to each other off mic as well, but it's it's worth having on the record that I don't know that I would have been as excited to do these episodes. I don't know that I would have done 2 episodes on Adventures of Superman had I not had you. I mean, the fact that you were as enthusiastic as you have been, again, I've enjoyed our conversations so much, and really, your enthusiasm and energy have fed my own rewatch. So it goes both ways, and I really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, let's get into the show. Just to kind of set the table a little bit for anyone who either is younger and never experienced the show, or maybe if you're new to Superman. Adventures of Superman, 1950s television series that it ran from 1952 to 1958, so it spanned 6 seasons. The first 2 seasons consisted of 26 episodes apiece and were shot and aired in black and white. Seasons 3 through 6 were 13 episodes apiece. They were shot in color, originally broadcast in black and white, and then subsequently aired in color during syndication. And the entire series has lived in syndication for all of these decades. And, for generations of Superman fans, I think for a lot of folks, it was their first introduction to the character. And for purposes of this podcast episode in particular, we'll primarily be focusing on the first 2 seasons for reasons that I think we'll get into shortly. And then we're also going to do another episode in 2 weeks where we talk a little bit perhaps about the color episodes in the later seasons, and even more so, I think, about the legacy of the show because there are a number of items there to sort of unpack. But I wanted to start by having us each speak about the role that the show has played in our respective Superman fan journeys. And I'm going to go first because it's real short for me. Until now, it played no role in my Superman fan journey. And that's actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast series in the first place. As much as I've been this lifelong Superman fan, there's plenty that I've never read or watched. As far as watching, though, specifically, when we talk about TV and movie adaptations of Superman, this was really the big gap for me. I mean, I've watched almost everything else when we talk about the Superman adaptations, but Adventures of Superman was a big gap for me. And, I knew of it, certainly, right? It's been written about in books and articles. And, there have been numerous Superman documentaries and special features on DVDs and things like that, where they've talked about the show, where I've seen interviews with the surviving cast members, where I've seen some footage. But that was really where most of my exposure to Adventures of Superman came from, was reading about it, or watching, documentary segments about it. The only real memory I have of watching the show itself was when I was a little kid, probably early elementary school. I remember being at my grandparents' apartment in the Bronx, and I remember my mom was in the kitchen with my grandparents. I was in the living room, and I do have this memory of watching the reruns on their television, but I have little memory of the specifics of the episodes, and at most, maybe I watched a handful. So until now, Adventures of Superman, despite being, a really big piece of the character's history, especially on film, it really didn't play a role in my Superman fan journey. But I know that it did play a big role in yours. So would you mind, explaining for our listeners and viewers, what your experience was and continues to be with the show?
Yeah. And to your point, you gave the facts, right? It ran from 1952 to 58. I was born in 56. And I can remember being, maybe 5 or 6 or thereabouts, just starting to watch the show. Now, for your listeners, I do want to clarify this. Again, I was watching it probably when the early 1960s, 62, 63, 64. It definitely triggered my interest in comics because I saw the character on the TV show. And then I can remember, when I'm being really young, like with my dad going to the barbershop and seeing some of the comics on the side table. But then also the first comic I ever bought was World's Finest, which was a team up with Superman and Batman. And I immediately recognized the Superman costume. Quite frankly, it was the shirt you're wearing right now, the bold blue and the red and the yellow. And I was just gravitated to that. So the show triggered my interest in reading comics. And that's been a hobby I've had, easily for the last 55 plus years. So I will say, to share this with your listeners, I remember watching this, maybe from the time I was 5 or 6 up till I was about 11 or so. And that was the mid 1960s. And then the Batman TV show came into play, and it was much more modern. So this black and white TV show that was shown on reruns was really kind of pushed to the background. But then over the past 11 or 12 weeks, I've just immersed myself in this, and it's given me an intense, wonderful appreciation for a host of issues with respect to this show. So,
yeah, no, that's terrific. I mean, do you remember the first episode that you saw when you were a kid?
No, but I can remember being fascinated with the character. And if I may, for your listeners, the intro to both the radio show that predated this, and I'll come back to that in a moment, and then this show itself, there's a little narration at the beginning that kind of gives 30 seconds of backdrop, explains who the character is and who Clark Kent is, but they always describe Superman as, quote, strange visitor from another planet. So when I was about, I guess, 8 or 9, I bought my first comic. I mean, I'd kind of dabbled in comics a little bit before, but I didn't buy any. And this was the one that explained Superman's relationship to Krypton. And I never knew that. So I do remember watching the episode or episodes. And, Anthony, I'm sure you'll speak to this. There was not a big budget. It was a very, very limited budget. They pumped these things out. They were really like a B movie serial. Not a lot of money for budget. Real tight production schedule. They pumped these things out. So the characters, the principal characters, Superman, Clark, Perry White, Lois, Jimmy, Inspector Henderson. He was almost he was in the TV show, but not the comics. They virtually wore the same clothes every episode because that offered certain efficiencies. So the episode itself doesn't stand out. And then I do want to say this because I think it will enhance our discussion. To me, from the research I've done and from my own viewing, there's kind of 3 segments of time with these episodes. It was kind of, the first 26 episodes were filmed, I'm going to call it on spec. They produced the first 26 episodes, but they didn't have a network or a purchaser or a sponsor. And then along came Kellogg's that became the sponsor. But for the season 1, it was really in TV Guide and on television. It was kind of portrayed as a crime drama. And then in season 2, there was a shift. The showrunner from season 1 kind of left, and DC brought in 2 story editors and writers. Whitney Ellsworth was one of the big story editors for the show, and he brought one of his editors who wrote comics, Mort Weisinger, in to play a role. So the 2 of them took a train ride from New York to California, gearing up for season 2. From somewhere I read that they kind of charted out like 15 episodes or so. And later on, I didn't do the research for today, but there is a definite synergy between the comics and the TV show. There's about anywhere possibly from 5 to 10 situations where there's a story in the comic book and there's also a TV show with either the same title or the same general premise. But they charted these out. So season 1 was a crime drama. Season 2 was the transition where it toned down the darkness and the noir. It kind of enhanced the comic book characterization a little bit more. It embraced science fiction a little bit more. And then really seasons 3 through 6, I think, were much more child-oriented. They really, really kind of knew that was their audience. And candidly, I enjoy the first 2 infinitely more. Probably the primary reasons are it was a little more serious because in seasons 3 to 6, the gangsters were just caricatures. They were kind of silly, and it was so nonviolent, it just really didn't capture my interest. Whereas seasons 1 and 2 were more serious, a little bit more gritty, a little more noir-oriented. Season 2 was a little more science fiction-oriented. So I gravitated more much to the first two seasons and enjoyed those.
Yeah, well said. I mean, you laid out a lot there, and you really encapsulated a lot about the style and the production and the history of the show. And yeah, for purposes of this recording, I watched the entirety of seasons 1 and 2, and I did this over over the past few months. And there were periods where I was a little bit more diligent with my watching, and other times where I kind of fell behind and I had to play catch up. I will admit that over the past 2 days, I've watched probably a good dozen or so episodes. And I really can't stress enough how much I enjoyed this viewing project. And, it's interesting because when you and I had that, one of those earliest phone calls where we had both, by coincidence, watched the first 2 episodes of the show, we spoke about them. And, I will admit here, we kind of busted on them a little bit, right? We poked fun at some of the things that were a little silly. And I will be honest that after just those first 2 episodes, I kind of thought that was how I was going to be viewing the series moving forward. Not watching it to make fun of it, but sort of, noticing the seams and things that were out of date, sort of viewing it in that context. And I'm happy to report that as I move forward through the rest of season 1 and season 2, I mean, it's not something that I've been watching to laugh or make fun of. It's not something that I've been watching ironically. I've genuinely enjoyed the show for numerous reasons that I'll get into. But it's really been a magnificent viewing project. And, for anyone who's, taking in this podcast, if you've never watched or if you haven't watched in a long time, I really do recommend it. There's a lot to enjoy with the show. I just want to circle back for a second to, again, your viewing history of Adventures of Superman when you were a kid, because I know you've shared with me that the Superman on Earth, the pilot episode that you finally watched now, this was the first time you had seen it, right? You missed it as a kid.
Yes, I missed it as a kid, and that's something I want to give an answer on that, but I do want to urge your listeners, if you can, Anthony and I both derived tremendous joy out of this. I would try to, cherry pick. You could go in and, through a streaming service or through one of the other services, see some of these things. We'll speak about some of the episodes that we think stand out. But getting back to your question, so, as a child, my family and I, we lived outside of Chicago from 1958 to 1970. Now, the show was broadcast originally from 52 to 58. And then when I was a child in the early 1960s, again, from like 1962 to maybe 66, 67, it would be displayed on reruns on one of the local stations. Now, at that time, growing up outside Chicago, the mid-1960s, there were the flagship networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, and there were maybe 2 local stations, and that was it. So in the summertime, WGN, which was their Channel 9, would broadcast the reruns from the Adventures of Superman. But it was all catch as catch can. I mean, at that time, I do remember, being able to read and on occasion checking the TV guide or the newspaper and stuff, but it wouldn't give a synopsis. It would just say, 4:00 in the afternoon, Adventures of Superman. So I could discern that there were differences between the accurate first 2 seasons that were purely black and white and the latter 4 seasons, both in tone and the pictures and the style of the costume. And I think that's because, Anthony, exactly what you said. They were forethinking and proactive enough to film the last 4 seasons in color, but they only displayed them in black and white. But you could tell there were some differences. George Reeves was a little bit heavier in the latter 4 seasons. But there was no rhyme nor reason. And as I said early on, the first season was really a crime drama. And from some of the reading I did, when Kellogg's became the sponsor, they even had some of the first season episodes toned down because they were a little violent, they were a little dark, they were a little creepy. So they edited them and cut things a little bit. On the DVD, or what you're going to see via streaming service, will be the complete show. So you'll see the whole thing in its entirety. But I think at that time, the managers of WGN were very, very child oriented, and they were concerned about the influence of these shows on children. There's one thing that I think is fascinating, and we're going to get onto this in collaboration. But in season 2, there's a standout episode. And I don't want to give the details away because I think we'll dig into that a little bit later on. But there's one point in time when Superman was struck with amnesia, and he's really wrestling, trying to fathom his true identity and work through a lot of issues. He's physically weak and hurt, and he's got amnesia. And he's puzzling through, and he's working through some questions, and he goes to Jimmy Olsen. He goes, geez, do you think the costume holds the powers? And Jimmy comes back with a very emphatic, no, it's not the costume. Superman has the powers. And that was so impressive, because I do know there was a lot of concern and fear that young children would think Superman was real, and they think they could jump off a roof, or they could jump off the back of the garage and not get hurt. So I was just impressed with, both from the writing standpoint and the production standpoint, they kind of wove those things in.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a very important point. And I noticed that as well. And I know we had discussed that. And the episode you're referring to, Panic in the Sky, we definitely have a lot more to say about that. But just, again, going back to the Superman on Earth, I remember you sharing that there was a classmate of yours, right? Or someone from the neighborhood who was talking about the episode. And you're like, what's he talking about? Because you hadn't seen it. Yeah, no, thank you. I remember that. Oh, my God, like it was yesterday. I can remember the baseball field we were in. What we were doing, we were gearing up for not a formal Little League game. Just a bunch of us would get together and play baseball. And I must have been about 10 or 11. And we were just waiting for other people to arrive. And getting back to what I said before about this being catch as catch can, we were at the mercy of the whims of the local TV manager. And, clearly they didn't show these things sequentially, or if they did, it was just, kind of serendipity. And Anthony, as you told your listeners, I never saw the season 1, episode 1 literally until about 3 months ago. And it's titled Superman on Earth. So I can remember this fellow, Tim Russell, who's a good friend of mine during elementary school. We're hanging out waiting for some of the other fellows to arrive. We're just going to play a catch-up game of baseball. And he was excited, and he spoke about this episode. And I can remember him telling me about it, and I felt so hurt that I didn't get to see it. But again, this was the mercy of when they just show these things, and the timing and the sequence of the episodes. They didn't do it in continuous fashion. But he described so much about it. And then literally when I watched the episode 2.5, 3 months ago, it was everything he said. I mean, one of the comments there, in that very first episode, these 25-minute episodes, every one of these episodes, they pack a lot of stuff in. It's fast-paced. But in the episode, there was a comment, young Clark goes home to his parents, and he's nervous about, just things he notices he's different from other boys his same age. And he tells his mother that, hey, we were playing baseball, we were playing catch, and the ball got lost, but I was able to see it. And his mother just goes, well, Clark, that's nothing to be worried about. You just got really good eyes. He goes, no, I was able to look through a rock and see it. And I can remember my friend describing that. And he also described stuff about Krypton and how it was portrayed. And I felt so hurt. Even though that was over 55 years ago, I can remember riding my bike home figuring, oh, shit, why did I go to this lousy baseball game? I should have been home watching the episode. No, it's so true. And it's like, we take that for granted now. I mean, these days between, DVR and on demand and the streaming services, if you miss something when it airs originally, it's no big deal at all. But yeah, you were really at the mercy of the programmers. And, it's obviously the episodes have been out on DVD now for a while, but still, decades before you had it readily available to watch whenever you wanted. And so it's fascinating. I'm glad you were finally able to watch it. I was actually surprised that they did the full origin. Again, I went into this pretty cold. I mean, you and I had some chats about it beforehand, but for the most part, I started watching these, relatively cold. And, just based on what I did know about the series as a whole, I really didn't think that they had devoted an episode to the telling of the origin, but they did. And, within the span of 25 minutes, we go from Krypton to Smallville to Metropolis. I mean, it really hits the major beats of the traditional origin story that I think most people would be familiar with. There's not a ton of time for, much, development or emotion or nuance, specifically on Krypton. I mean, Jor-El was, there was really no hesitation about putting the baby in the rocket and sending him off. It was, just got right to it.
Yes. And, again, Anthony said this so truthfully and sincerely and eloquently. We're not trying to ridicule or diminish it, but for your listeners who are able to see it, diplomatically, let's just say they didn't put a lot of production work into the background or the scenery or the effects. It's kind of a threadbare scientific laboratory that Jor-El's operating out of.
Yeah, but and it's interesting because I thought about this at the time, going back to what I was saying about a relatively emotionless Jor-El, sending his only son out into the depths of space. On the one hand, again, they didn't have a lot of time, right? But I think it's also probably a function of the time period, right? I mean, we're talking about the early 1950s. I don't know that an emotional Jor-El cradling his son, imparting
would have played.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think that this was probably in keeping with the way 1950s notions of masculinity were considered at the time.
No, that's a superb comment. I mean, this is really, World War II had only been over for 6 or 7 years. So it was kind of the programming, the DNA and makeup of the American male circa 1952. More stoic, more just serious. But getting back to what you said, and again, 11 or 12 weeks ago was the first time I'd seen it. And the thoroughness of telling that whole story. I mean, they even get into parts of the story where Jor-El is making a plea to the Science Council. He goes, look, I've got empirical data. I'm worried we're going to have problems, but we've got time to do things. Now, I think he was wrong. The Krypton quakes and the destruction of the planet came faster than even he had envisioned. But it does play out how they didn't listen to him. He was effectively ridiculed. They play out that, okay, hey, the whole planet's starting, the earthquakes and the things are really going to hell in a handbasket fast. He and Lara put young Kal-El into the rocket. The special effects, I thought, when they showed the rocket going through space and landing on Earth and the planets, for the time and that finite budget, I thought it was better than I expected.
Yeah, for that episode and the series as a whole, I mean, certainly looking at it through, the lens of 2020, 2021 and everything that we've seen accomplished via technology and film and television. I mean, yes, it is, very basic, but to your point, I think they accomplished a lot with what they had. And I certainly, over and over as I was watching these episodes, I thought to myself, boy, like I can 100% see how kids in the 50s, 60s, 70s, were just so taken by this and how they were able to buy into this and how this really was a very worthy introduction to the character for generations of kids. I mean, I totally saw that. And, but again, going back to that first episode, like we keep saying, I mean, I think it also speaks to just the timelessness of the Superman origin story. Certain things change, of course, like in this version, the Kents are named Eben and Sarah, right? We don't have Jonathan and Martha quite yet. But again, like it really hits all of those beats. Jor-El's warnings go unheeded. They send Kal-El into space. The Kents find him. We visit with him during his adolescence where he's struggling with his powers, the scene that you referenced where he's seeing through the rock. We have the passing of Pa Kent and Clark embarking on his adult journey, going to Metropolis, adopting the Clark Kent reporter guise, and making his debut as Superman. And, so it hits all of the beats in a short amount of time. And but the other thing that really stood out to me, again, just the richness of the Superman story, is that, this was, again, the 50s, and it's crazy to think that at the time, you only had a decade plus of the comics, you had the radio show, and you had the Fleischer cartoons. So, I mean, that's not nothing, but at the same time, it's not like this television series had 80 years worth of movies and TV shows and comics to draw from. So I think it really, broke a lot of ground in what it was able to do and what it was able to bring to screen. And, over all of these years, each time the origin story gets told, I think we get a new layer to it. We get a little bit more depth. There are new angles to explore. And so, this I think was very much a starting point. And yes, it might feel a little bit basic compared to, what we've seen in subsequent movies and television shows. But, I think it accomplished a lot, and it did it in a short amount of time. And it did it well. It set up the character quickly and really hit the ground running.
Agreed.
To take us right into episode 2, which was probably, I don't know about you, but it was one of my 2 least favorite episodes of the entire series.
Yeah, Anthony, same here. You made an inaccurate assumption. That was one of the episodes I had seen as a child. I didn't like it then, so I didn't watch it. I leapt from the very, very, very first episode to the Broken Statues episode.
Okay.
I knew the essence and the details of episode 2, but it never appealed to me. Even when I've seen it a couple of times, but it just never appealed to me. Now, I want to let you comment, but I do have to say to your listeners, regardless of what episode or season you watch, Jimmy Olsen has got to be a screenwriter's dream. I mean, his ability to give them what they need to fill the 25 minutes is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, so the episode that we're referring to is the second episode of the series. I believe the title is The Haunted Lighthouse, but you and I know it as the Moose Island episode.
Yes.
And in the episode, young James Olsen visits distant relatives on Moose Island, and he stumbles upon a smuggling ring that's being run out of this lighthouse. Clark and Superman don't appear until deep into the episode, so it's really a Jimmy Olsen episode. And
first 15 minutes are all Jimmy.
Yeah, and to me, kind of an odd choice for the second outing of the show, and that's why I was a little wary after just watching those first 2 episodes. But I would say those are not I mean, again, as much as I did enjoy Superman on Earth, neither that nor the Moose Island episode are really representative of most of the rest of the episodes of the first couple of seasons. But just going back to the production, you hit on this before, and it's fascinating to me that 26 episodes were produced on spec. I mean, the producers made a full season's worth of episodes before they had a home for it. And of course, what came first was the hour-long movie, Superman and the Mole Men. That was really their pilot. And after that, they created, 24 more episodes. And then Superman and the Mole Men was repurposed as a 2-part episode at the end of season 1. So again, whether you're on a streaming service or you're on the DVDs, you'll find Superman and the Mole Men as a 2-part season 1 finale. And that too, again, it's so fascinating to me because Superman and the Mole Men also is very much an outlier compared to the rest of the first season, which, as you said, was very crime oriented. They were really, little short film noirs. And Superman and the Mole Men dealt with this race of little people living under the earth, the Mole Men. And as much as you did have Clark and Lois investigating, right, and that was certainly a hallmark of the entire series. None of the action took place in Metropolis. There was no Daily Planet. Again, no crooks and gangsters. It was really, again, as you said, something that we would maybe see a little bit later on, something more sci-fi oriented with the Mole Men.
And it was also, for its time, thematically, it really touched on a lot of, even that would stand up today, important social issues like prejudice and not being discriminatory and xenophobic things. For its time, it really, really thematically touched on these questions. And then it was, the true season 1 was a little more of a crime drama. But that first movie, boy, it does make you think when Superman's confronting the townspeople and he's standing up to them to protect these visitors, from the lower earth. And then to the backdrop to the audience, these mole men, long story short, I think there's some oil drill well in Texas that goes deepest, deeper than ever before. And that's the tunnel through which these mole men come up to the surface world. But sadly, they're radioactive, so they pose a threat to Earth people. But Superman is very protective, and it does touch on things against anti-discrimination, anti-racial exclusion, xenophobia. It was pretty powerful, I think, for its time. Sorry, I'll let you.
No, I echo all of that. I was so impressed. I mistakenly thought that original movie was called Superman versus the Mole Men. And it's not. It's Superman and the Mole Men, and that's a very important distinction. If you're on the streaming services or you're on the DVDs, it was renamed The Unknown People. So it's a 2-part story called The Unknown People. But again, was originally titled Superman and the Mole Men. And exactly to your point, really the crux of that 2-part story is Superman protecting these unknown people from the angry mob. And it was a turn that I really was not expecting, and I really enjoyed. And I think that you always think about the power that Superman has as a role model, and especially with a series like this that, you had kids growing up watching this, to see a character like Superman, idolized by all of these kids, taking a stand like that and saying like, no, like these people deserve to live. They deserve to be free. And really standing up to this angry mob, really resonated. I thought that was a very powerful episode. I didn't really go into that with such high hopes. Mostly because, again, I really was enjoying the crime-oriented season 1, and then I knew we had, this Mole Men episode at the end, and I said, I don't know how good this is going to be, and I was really pleasantly surprised by the turn that it took. We have so much more to unpack. Let's take a super quick 30-second commercial break, and then we will come right back with more. The Hive Comics and Games is an oasis of nerd fun and events in the heart of Odessa, Texas. Whether it's comic book superhero stories or role-playing in a dungeon, the Hive is where to be. Come tap your mana and face off against the top Magic the Gathering players in West Texas. Hive carries a majority of new comic titles each Wednesday and has all of your favorite titles in their back issue section. Follow them on Facebook at The Hive Comics and on Instagram at The Hive Comic Shop. And we're back. So, Rich, I want to share a listener question. So members of my Patreon page at a certain level have the option to write a question or a comment that I will read on the air. And this brought such a smile I laughed when I read this, and I suspect that as I read it to you, you will have a similar reaction. And I know it will be a great springboard into further discussion of these season 1 and season 2 episodes. So Eric Noriega wrote, "There's an episode of Adventures of Superman where a bad guy learns Superman's secret identity. Superman basically decided to keep him prisoner. The guy dies trying to escape. I've looked for this episode for years, but haven't been able to learn much about it. It always bugged me as a kid that Superman would be okay knowing this guy died because he imprisoned him. Did I dream this episode?"
His memory is spot on. The episode is titled The Stolen Costume. And Anthony, in anticipation of our chat, I watched that episode just yesterday. But I can remember as a child being disturbed at the end of it. So to your listeners, here's the backdrop. I think this is what would you say? This is episode 7 or 9 of season 1. It's kind of early in the progression.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit before the halfway point of the first season.
Yeah. But it's titled The Stolen Costume. Long story short, the Daily Planet is changing insurance carriers, and Clark has to go in for some sort of health exam with the new group insurance medical plan. So he leaves his costume in this secret closet in his apartment. Purely by coincidence, there's a very elusive rope burglar who, rappels down off buildings and skyscrapers and breaks into apartments and steals stuff. He is, I guess, spotted by the police as he happens to be at Clark's apartment building. Clark's out, getting his medical exam. It's nighttime. This guy to evade the police, bursts in. Hiding from the police, he hits the secret switch that opens the hidden closet, and he sees the costume, grabs the costume, and escapes. But as he's escaping, he is shot, catches a bullet in the back. And then he goes to his boss, and the boss is a crime boss. He's got the quintessential mole, pretty blonde woman. Actually, she was the smarter of the two in the episode. She connected all the dots. But Superman is just really anxious because his costume's out there. He doesn't know where it is. And he's afraid that someone's going to determine his identity, because it was stolen out of his Clark Kent apartment. So he engages one of his private detective friends, some guy named Candy. And then there's a case of mistaken identity where the crime lord and his mole assume Candy is Superman. Clark is able to rescue Candy, break in, but he takes the crime lord and his girlfriend to this very, very cold mountaintop. And there's apparently off camera, there's a cabin, but he tells them, look, I got to figure out what to do. You're going to be safe in this cabin. I'm going to go back and get some food and warm clothes, but do not try to climb down this mountain. Don't do it. Stay here till I can figure out what to do. Well, sure enough, they both start climbing down. And this is really like a huge mountain. She's got high heels on. He's got his suit on. And I will say, the bad guy was not slim. He was he liked his steak dinners and gin and tonics. He puffed up a bit. So he's kind of rolling down some of these rocks, and he's telling his girlfriend, come on down, it's a cinch. Well, her high heels slip on this icy patch that's like probably at a 45-degree angle. She falls into him. They fall and die. The amazing thing was it just quickly cuts to the next scene where Candy's kind of debriefing with Clark and goes, hey, Clark, you're in a much better mood. He goes, yep, I got that thing that was lost back, But, boy, Clark is not there's no guilt on his conscience. Anthony, you articulated it better than I could about perhaps Clark's mindset at the very end of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a beautiful summary, and you hit on all of the salient points. And yeah, I mean, I could see how a modern day viewer would find the end a little bit jarring. The fact that Superman would take these people and exile them, and the fact that he would be as cavalier about their demise as he appears to be at the end. But I was okay with it. Again, it's different it's so funny because I always think about, Smallville's Clark Kent, who was constantly racked with guilt and doubt over the course of 10 seasons. And if he had done something similar, he would have been all torn up about it. Not this Superman. But the way I look at it is, again, going back to the time that we're talking about here, I think the morality was a little bit different and maybe a little bit more black and white. And I feel like for this Superman, he probably figured, listen, I didn't kill them. I brought them someplace safe. I was going to take care of them. I told them not to try to climb down. I gave them every chance. They didn't listen. That's what they get. I really think that was kind of the mindset.
I agree. I mean, I've got a couple of questions I wish to ask you,
sure.
But I want to get this out because it's important to me. And I hope and pray that your listeners and viewers will really find this of interest. But I will say there's one thing I want to remember to come back to. But one thing I got to say, as a child growing up and reading comic books throughout the 1960s, and I loved Superman. Kurt Swan is my favorite Superman artist. So I love a lot of the 1960s Superman and Action Comics stories, World's Finest. I love those stories, and I have a lot of them still probably in reprint, but I've kept a lot. But in those stories, Clark, the comic books really play up Clark as he goes overboard to have this timid, meek, almost geekish, apprehensive personality, where he is not forthright. That's not the right word. He really plays up the timid aspect, so no one suspects he's Superman. So he's more mild and meek and timid. There's none of that here. I mean, especially in season 1 and in season 2. But boy, Clark, I mean, I want to get to this because I want to unbundle this. I have come to really like the persona, the portrayal that George Reeves gave, because, one thing I've heard before, I remember reading this, when Christian Bale first did Batman, he was learning about the character. And one of his interviews, he says, Bruce Wayne is the mask. This character is really Batman. In the Christopher Reeve story, and in almost all the stories in the Silver Age, Clark is the mask. He's the fake persona. He's the timid guy. He is going to be so timid, people don't connect him being Superman. There's none of that here. I mean, this Clark is very confident, very decisive, very purposeful. He moves with a sense of urgency. He doesn't take guff from anybody. Like in a couple of episodes, he's almost like a Sam Spade detective in the first season. In the broken statues episode, there's one point when he walks into a jewelry store and there's 2 gang members who are leaving. And one of these gang members is bigger than him, and they're charging at him. And even as Clark, he just starts pushing them around as though they're nothing. So he doesn't take guff from anybody. I will say what fascinated me a lot about season 1 and season 2 is he seems, and I don't think this is artificial acting, he seems to have great chemistry with children. In the few episodes when there's a child star, he seems really, really compassionate. He's smiling. He's having a good time. So he struck me as, in all the episodes I saw in the first 2 seasons, just this wonderful chemistry with children. But then I also love it at the end, at the end of all the episodes, when he breaks the 4th wall and he gives a real great smile and a wink. So his acting prowess was better than I think people gave him credit for. So I want to get your reaction on all that.
Yeah, he was truly astounding in the role. And, it's hard for me to really rank the Superman actors because there are certain aspects that I like. I think really, for the most part, each of them, brought something, a little bit different and special to the role. It's hard for me to rank them, but I would say after watching these first 2 seasons, the George Reeves depiction of the character is really up there for me. In thinking about, I know I keep saying I've enjoyed these episodes so much, and I've really enjoyed them for 2 primary reasons. The first is that, what might be seen as a weakness of the show, the fact that they were so limited by budget and the technology of the time, I think they turned into a great strength because they told stories that they were able to tell on a limited budget, and they ended up being the types of stories you don't typically see, particularly on TV and film when we're talking about Superman adaptations. They really are these Daily Planet-centric crime stories and mysteries, really driven by Clark and Lois and Jimmy and Perry and Inspector Henderson investigating. And they're very small stories in most cases. Again, especially in these first 2 seasons. Not a single DC Comics villain is used. Not even Lex, who doesn't have any powers. They're all crooks, con men, gangsters, crime bosses. And again, it's really Clark and Lois and Jimmy, but really Clark driving, a lot of the action as he's investigating. And in most episodes, especially in the first season, I noticed a shift in the second season, but especially in the first season, in most episodes, Superman doesn't show up until the very end when they're really in a jam and they need him to rescue them. But for the most part, it's so much of the investigating. And, as I was watching it, I did not feel like, oh man, I really wish I could see, Superman fight Brainiac or Zod. I've seen that before, but I've never seen a lot of the types of episodes that I've never seen an episode or read a comic where, Superman's costume gets stolen and he has to track it down. So that was one of the things that I really loved. And, I know I've said this to you many times over the years, and I've probably said it on other podcasts. I've always wanted a Daily Planet-centric comic book series in a similar vein to what Gotham Central was for the Batman universe, right? Something really focused on the GCPD cops. I've always wanted something that was really focused on Clark and his colleagues as reporters, where Superman is really more in the background. And especially for a lot of these season 1 episodes, I feel like I got that with this show. So that's the first thing that I really loved, that, you know, again, it's a different type of story than you typically get to see. And I appreciated that, and I was there for it. And the other aspect of the show that really made me a fan was the performance of George Reeves. I think that he, I mean, not to go overboard in my praise, but I think he might have the best mix and balance of, at times, competing characteristics, because as both Clark and Superman, he is decisive and authoritative and tough and impatient in a lot of instances, but he's also kind and caring and compassionate. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, again, as much as I love all of the other Superman actors, I think in this version we see maybe the best mix of all of those different qualities. And to your point about his chemistry with children, the last episode of season 2 is one of the most heartwarming Superman stories I've ever experienced. It's called Around the World with Superman. And the premise is that the Daily Planet is running this contest for children have to write essays to be considered, and the winner will get flown around the world by Superman. And the winner of the contest is this blind girl who wanted to win the contest for her mother. And the girl herself is blind and doesn't believe in Superman. And there's this amazing scene where Clark, in his Clark Kent garb, talks to the girl as Superman, because it's just the two of them in the room and she's blind, so she can't see what he's dressed as. So we see him dressed as Clark, minus the glasses, but he's talking to her as Superman, and he takes an iron rod and he bends it for her, and he goes into the other room and he says, "Whisper something and I'll hear it." And, you know, like you said, the way that he was able to relate to her, the compassion, the kindness, it really, like, it melted my heart. And it was one of the only episodes. Panic in the Sky dealt with, you know, an asteroid hurtling towards Earth, but other than that, it was the only episode. There was no bad guy. The premise was, you know, Clark trying to get through to this little girl, and then ultimately he's able to use his X-ray vision to identify because she had been blinded in a car accident, and he's able to use his X-ray vision to identify a fragment of glass in her optic nerve, and he further uses his X-ray vision to guide the doctors in an operation that restores her sight.
Wow!
And then at the end of the episode, he flies her around the world, and he reunites her and her mother with the father whom they had been estranged from. It was a beautiful, beautiful episode. And again, the type of thing that you don't typically see. And again, that really is an outlier compared to most of the rest of the episodes, but it really stood out, and just a lovely, lovely episode.
Boy, that was a great summary. And I don't think he could fake it. I mean, he seemed to have such a wonderful smile. I mean, there were some other historic videos, like when he was selling stamps, or Superman Week or Superman Day, where a bunch of children were all around him, and he seemed so happy just to make them laugh and smile.
And you know, I wanted to bring this up too, and I know for audience members, a lot of this stuff Rich and I have already talked about. A lot of it is new though too. It's a good mix. But I know I said this to you, and I wanted to bring it up. And you know, earlier in this episode, I mentioned the precursors to Adventures of Superman. You know, the Fleischer cartoons, but more specifically, there were 2 movie serials starring Kirk Alyn as Clark and Superman. There was one in 1948 and one in 1950, and these were 15-chapter serials, and you would get a chapter a week or whatever in front of the movie that you were seeing at the theater, right?
Correct.
So I watched the first few chapters of the first serial. And, you know, for anyone who's not familiar, you might have heard about them. They were most notable for the fact that as limited as the Adventures of Superman technology was, it was even more limited, I guess, a few years earlier, because whenever Superman would fly, he would be rendered via animation. So he would turn into a cartoon. So that's, I think, kind of the claim to fame of those serials. But, you know, and I don't say this to put down Kirk Alyn. I mean, he was our first live action Superman, and you know, credit where credit's due. But I watched the first few of them, and the costume that Kirk Alyn wears is not at all dissimilar from the costume that George Reeves wears. Yet, when Kirk Alyn is in that costume running around on screen, to me, he looked like a guy in a Halloween costume running around. When George Reeves, in mostly the same costume, jumps into frame on Adventures of Superman, I buy that he's Superman. There was it's the sort of thing, right? Like, you can't teach that in acting school. There was a presence that he had, and he just made you believe. And I think it's his performance that transcends the limitations of the budget. Because, in terms of his powers generally, and especially the flying, I mean, they're depicted in pretty rudimentary ways, but it's like, it doesn't matter because he has that presence, and it's like, you buy that he's Superman. And that was something that I really, because did you watch any of the Kirk Alyn serials?
No, I wasn't able to. I mean, I think on some of the DVD sets, you gave me some DVDs. I think they might have like a brief vignette, but they didn't dig into it. Now, to your point, I do want to say this, probably 4 different thoughts, and I didn't plan on this, so to your listeners, I'm commingling all these ideas. But from what I've learned, and Anthony, you can testify to this, when George Reeves first signed up to do this and became the actor, he was hesitant. I mean, he really wanted to be a feature film star. And at that point in society, there was a lot of disdain for TV, especially, actors felt that if they signed up for TV, they were just cutting their throat. They were not going to be given the opportunity to get back to feature films. And I think even Kirk Alyn was originally approached for the TV show, and he turned it down, Kirk Alyn. I absolutely agree with what you said. I mean, in seasons 1 and seasons 2, when it's George Reeves in that costume. Now, he was a boxer. I mean, he was very proficient as a boxer. And I think his mother forced him to quit boxing because he had his nose broken like 8 times. But he, from an acting standpoint, the portrayal, he depicted a real tough, strong person. So it was very credible. When he came into the bad guys, or when he walked around wearing the costume, it was very credible. He also, I think, did a lot of his own stunts, so he was very athletic. I know he was served in World War II in the Air Force, and I think he felt that because he had been away in service and because of the changes in the times, he lost his connections to get into feature films, so he was hesitant to do this TV show. But to his credit, I think he poured his all into that Clark Kent personality. And to what you said about 7 or 8 minutes ago, it's so interesting to me how close the two characters are. I mean, there's other portrayals where there's a gap. And again, Clark is portrayed as one personality. Superman is very different. Here, they are so close. In my mind, Clark is the real deal, but Superman is so close. He's just an extension of the Clark Kent personality in this medium, in this TV show.
I really do tend to agree with that. I mean, really, other than attire, the only real difference in the way he plays both characters, there is a shift in voice, in tone. It's not a dramatic one, but it is there. Like, his Clark voice is a little bit softer usually. But again, there are plenty of instances where he really gets fired up, and there really is not much. You and I have joked about this so many times.
I know where you're going.
There's an episode in season 1 called Night of Terror, and for the most part, it's not the most memorable episode. Lois is staying at a hotel, and bad guys show up, and she and one of the hotel workers get kidnapped, and it goes from there. But like, the whole thrust of the episode is Lois just trying to get word to the Daily Planet and to Superman about where she is and the fact that she's in danger. And it becomes a farce, basically. I mean, I don't think it was intended this way, but that's kind of the way I took it, where, she's finally able to get through to Jim. And there were a number of shifts between seasons 1 and 2, which I want to jump back to in a second. But she gets word to Jim. Jim goes to try to rescue her, but he leaves a note. He writes out a note for Clark, and he gives it to the Daily Planet secretary and says, make sure Mr. Kent gets this. And she's like, oh, well, I'm about to go out to lunch, so I'll leave it on his desk. And she puts it on his desk and she closes the door, and the little gust of wind that generates knocks the note to the floor. It gets, taken away when they come around to collect the garbage. And when Clark shows up and the secretary is trying to help him find the note, like, he gets so impatient and so worked up with her. She even says, she's like, there's no need to shout, Mr. Kent. Like,
yeah. She gets so flustered.
He had no time. There were so many instances of that. In one of the episodes that I just watched, the season 2 episode is called The Lady in Black, where
Jimmy apartment sits.
Jimmy's, and well, I want to come back to that too. But Jimmy's kind of freaked out at the place that he's staying, and he calls Clark, who's working late at the Planet, and like he wants to talk, and Clark is he has no time for Jimmy, and he's like, Jimmy, kiss your mother and go to sleep. Like, but it's like, it's what I love. See, and I think this has been and will continue to be a theme on this podcast series. A lot of what we're describing, right, in the stolen costume and his impatience, it doesn't really jive with a lot of, what we think of when we think of Superman. But to me, it still feels like the essence of the character. And I think that's what's, again, so rich about Superman, is that you can kind of take these different angles and amplify different aspects of his personality. And it still feels like it doesn't feel like this is a character so divorced from the Superman we know, even though, again, you see certain qualities that you don't often when especially in the films and movies.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
But I got to go back to Jimmy Olsen for a second. What is with it's? I mean, what age do you think he's supposed to be in this show, roughly? Like early 20s? Late?
Early 20s would be even on the high side. I thought he would be more like 19 years old, just starting out, kind of graduating high school and being young. That was where I pegged him.
Okay.
18, 19, something like that.
I think my point will still stand. This kid, he still lives with his mother, which is fine, but apparently he can never stay alone if his mom's not there, because there are 2 episodes that stand out. There's one, The Boy Who Hated Superman from season 2. Do you remember that one?
Is that the one where there's some like gangster?
Yeah, there's a gangster in prison, and his nephew is a minor and needs a guardian. And so Clark offers to let the kid stay with him. That kid, too, mind you, looked like he was about 25, but all right, we'll buy that. Maybe he's like 17.
Buying $300 suits and stuff like that.
Yeah, he tries to seduce Jimmy to the dark side. But Clark offers to take this kid in, and he makes the point of saying to the kid and to the judge, he's like, Jim Olsen's mother is out of town, so he's staying with me too. And I suspect that was done so that there wouldn't be any sort of nothing untoward about this grown man wanting to take this boy to his home.
I agree.
But it was just so funny to me that it's like Jimmy's mother is out of town, so it's like he can't stay by himself. And then that Lady in Black episode, the premise of that is that he's staying with this deaf woman in her apartment because, again, his mother is out of town. Just funny to me.
Yeah. Well, why don't you tell, if you could do it better than me, brief your listeners and viewers on the cereal commercials and what was allowed and what was not allowed.
Yeah, I mean, if people might have heard about this before, it's pretty famous at this point, I think. But as you said, Kellogg's came aboard as the show's sponsor and helped get it picked up and continue to produce subsequent seasons. And so the cast would often appear in Kellogg's cereal commercials. And I think originally the idea for one of the commercials was for Lois and Clark to be eating cereal in the morning, but that was deemed too suggestive because it implied they had spent the night together. So instead they swapped Lois with Jimmy Olsen, which I guess no one thought that would raise any questions. But yeah, the times were different. I mean, there's that Ghost Wolf episode, right, where Lois and Clark and Jimmy go to this, it's the timber company that the Daily Planet uses, right?
For paper supply, timber logging camp.
Right, and allegedly there's this werewolf that's terrorizing everyone, and of course that turns out to not be the case. But Lois is staying in the cabin by herself while Jimmy and Clark are in the men's barracks. And then there is a wolf at the window, and Lois gets freaked out, and she wants to come stay in the barracks. We've been told that there's hundreds of rooms, and no one else is there.
150, yeah.
But Clark is like, Lois, that's the men's barracks. So yeah, it was a different time. But yeah,
to pick up on that, a couple of things. Absolutely. I do want to let your listeners know, as we talk about this, again, the budget was small, very, very fast paced, very quick production pace. I would say in the majority of these, in each show, and Anthony, you said this, again, there's no major overarching villain, no Lex Luthor, no Brainiac, no Zod, none of the other characters. But they were all done in one.
Yep.
Basically each one was a discrete episode. But in most of these episodes, I would say on the high side, maybe there's 12 or 14 people, even if you count the henchmen and stuff like that. There were not big casts in these things. And, Anthony, I'm sure you picked up on it. Like in the first season, what did they had the case of the talking dummy? And then they followed up with the broken statues. But they had the same two bad guys in each of those episodes. And then there was, in season 1, another episode where there was Perry wanted to investigate wrestling, because he thought it was so corrupt. And it was a super fantastic, no pun intended, sorry there. That was a bad adjective. But it was a very intense physical thing. I mean, Superman really fought 6 or 7 guys at the end, and they were all big, beefy guys. So it really showed his prowess athletically and George Reeves' boxing ability when he took these guys out. But in that episode and in the next episode, the young college student in the wrestling episode was also in that one when they went back to that deserted town. He was the son of the bad guy. Right. So they recycled characters. That one poor guy that flew the plane in the Mind Machine, I saw him in about 4 episodes in different roles.
That poor guy in the Mind Machine, when Clark clocks him because he has to protect his identity. He's in the plane with this guy, just knocks him out. But as far as there are a few things that I wanted to pick up on, but as far as recycling actors, but they recycled a lot of footage too. I mean, and you notice this very quickly. I mean, in the first season in particular, all of the flying shots, there's basically 2 to 3 flying shots of different angles that just get used over and over again. There's also, and once I noticed this, I could not see it.
Is this when he runs to the stockroom with his hat? For
most of the first 2 seasons, whenever Clark changes to Superman, if he's outside, there's stock footage of him running like flailing as he's running down the alley, right? And then he comes out as Superman. Or if he's inside the Daily Planet or really anywhere, it's you see him run into the storage closet. But in that, he has his hat on. And there are countless scenes where in the preceding scene, Clark is in his office with no hat, and he races out of his office, and then we switch to the stock footage, and there's the hat.
Yeah, yes. Even as a child, I noticed that he would leave Perry's office. They'd still be talking. He'd rush out of Perry's office, run to the stock room, but he would have his hat in his hand, or he'd take it off as he was running down the hall. I saw that a lot. And then that stock footage with the alley, right? When he apparently he tried to run in a real herky-jerky way to give the illusion it was super speed. Now, maybe they could have just sped up the film.
Yeah, I think that might have worked a little bit better. It was but the thing with the stock room, it just drove me nuts because it's how long would it have taken them to? This footage is literally 2, maybe 3 seconds. Yeah. It's how long would it have taken them to do one where he doesn't have his hat? Finally, towards deep into season 2, they finally filmed a new one. Where he's hatless. So at least there was more consistency. To your point, though, most of the characters typically are in their same outfits for almost every episode. I mean, there are even instances, you and I joked about this, where, when Clark and Perry go to Haiti, to the jungles of Haiti, and Clark's still in his suit. But,
Or even the Ghost Wolf.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. But they did that for a specific reason. I think you hit on this before about how, quickly they pump these out, but they would basically do 2 a week. They 2 episodes per week, and they would stack the scene. So they would do a bunch of the scenes in Perry White's office all together. So, having everyone in the same costume, made that process more seamless. Again, for the actors, I'm sure that was probably tough to really keep track of what was going on. I mean, again, these episodes were largely more plot driven than character driven or emotion driven or anything like that. So I don't know that it was so much of like, it's hard for me to get into the mindset of the character. Nevertheless, I'm sure just keeping track of where you are story wise got challenging when you were doing like so many of them.
Agreed. And I also read at some point, I don't think they were finite 2 a week. They might have been filming 4 parts of 4. So they might have the Perry White Office episodes for 4 episodes being filmed all at once. And that was the advantage of the same clothes. But it's a credit to those actors to remember where they were. And, is this just informational? Is Lois in trouble? Is someone stressed out? So kudos to them for just being alert as they were and just really being on their mark and knowing the lines. I don't think the directors had a lot of patience.
Probably not. But and going back to the physicality of George Reeves. So, in terms of how they handled his takeoffs and landings, when he was taking off, there was a springboard that he would jump on, and, he would jump and he would land on it and it would kind of propel him out of frame. So that took some physicality. And then I believe there was a rope or something that he would swing in on, right? When he was landing. So he did a lot. And, I know we, keep talking about the first season and the type of Superman that this was. He literally engages in fisticuffs with the bad guys on a routine basis throughout those season 1 episodes. I mean, he's literally, and again, this is the sort of thing you don't typically see from Superman unless he's fighting Brainiac or Zod or Doomsday. But he's punching people.
Yeah, to your point, that wrestling episode, at the very end, there's a scene when he goes into the gym and there's like 6 or 8 wrestlers and, 6 or 7, but absent the boss, all the other guys are basically bigger and heavier than George Reeves. And it really choreographed well. I mean, it looks like he's really throwing punches. It's exciting to watch, even though it's 65 years old. I still get jazzed watching that just because of the action. I mean, those people didn't get paid a lot. I heard they got like $200 an episode. So, kudos to them for what they did just to deliver on this.
Yeah. And, just circling back to the stolen costume, I think one of the reasons why, so obviously that stands out for the ending and the way Superman deals with the criminals who know his identity. But beyond that, I think it's probably my favorite episode of the first season and one of my favorites in general. But the 2 things that I really liked about it, one is that the stakes were personal for Clark in this episode in a way that they typically weren't, right? Like typically they were solving mysteries, solving crimes. You mentioned the case of the broken statues, right? The premise of that was that these guys were going around to like antique stores all over town and paying for statues that they were smashing. And no one could figure out why they were doing that, right? And then, of course, we find out that one of the statues has a key to a lockbox with stolen goods, right? And they were trying to track it down. That's kind of representative of the gist of a lot of these episodes, especially in the first season, like cases that our characters are trying to solve. And, in some cases, we're in the dark as are the characters. In other cases, like with the Night of Terror, we know what's going on, but it's a matter of Clark, Superman finding out what's going on.
Agreed. And that one episode where they returned to Lois's hometown, the village where she grew up, we were learning, the viewers were learning as they were learning. So it made it very interesting. We were both learning simultaneously.
Yes. Those tended to be more engaging. The ones where we were ahead of the characters and it was just a matter of, again, like Clark figuring out which cabin Lois was staying at, those were a little bit more tedious. But that's why I like the stolen costume so much, because it really did kind of break with that formula and the stakes were much more personal. So I really like that a lot. But that's sort of the gist of a lot of those season 1 episodes. As we I know we've hit on this, but I want to unpack it a little bit more. The shift that occurred between seasons 1 and 2, because I was really looking at these episodes very closely based on what we had talked about. I'll be honest, I did not notice so much of a sci-fi influence in the second season. There is an episode with synthetic kryptonite, and of course there's Panic in the Sky with the asteroid. There's also an episode with a machine that can plot crimes. But other than that...
well, wasn't there also an episode where a nuclear reactor went into
Yes, where he
overdrive?
goes radioactive. Yes, that's a good one. You're right.
Yeah.
So there were a few more like that, but I would say that as a whole, just in terms of, the types of cases that they were up against, I felt like it was of a piece with the first season. But the changes that I really did notice, for one thing, Superman is not throwing nearly as many punches. There are a few, but very few.
I'm so sorry, but I want to come back to something you said. Prior to that re-editing of the feature film from 1951, the final episode from a filming standpoint was Crime Wave. Was it Crime Wave? But they recycled so much of the prior 23 episodes. They did put it real fast-paced together again, and as he's taking out the different gangs, they edited all that. So you saw him throwing the same punch you might have seen 3 weeks earlier or something like that. So that's something where they didn't waste a film that was already captured.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. That episode really did stand out. Yeah, Crime Wave, the third to last episode, if you're looking at your DVDs of the first season. And yeah, it was so funny watching that, because I'm like, is this entire thing going to be a clip show? I mean, they like minutes go by where it's primarily footage from past episodes, and also like newsreel footage that they spliced in as the narrator is explaining this crime wave that's been going on. And it, like, I'll be honest, I didn't mind it, and I thought it was pretty clever and economical of the producers, because it's like now they have a season's worth of footage of Superman punching bad guys. And it's like they put it all together and made it appear like, okay, this is a new episode where Superman is busting up all of these crime rings one after the other.
Agreed. Totally agreed.
One of the funniest things about that is the bad guys in the episode obtain footage of Clark turning into Superman. They get footage of the scene that we described, that stock footage of Clark running into the alley and coming out as Superman. And after they get this information, they call the Daily Planet for Clark Kent, and they ask for Superman. And, ultimately, at the end of the day, Superman wins, but you figure like, okay, like there's going to be some payoff to the fact that these bad guys know. It is completely dropped, which is kind of baffling, but it was so funny because as I was watching that, and I think there's like 4 of them as they're sitting there watching the footage of Clark changing into Superman. And I thought to myself, oh, you guys are getting a trip to that mountaintop. Just wait.
And Anthony, if you think about it, the apartment that they were in that very last one with the 4 watching the film, that was the exact same setup as the stolen costume, because when the guy who got shot comes in, they let him lay down on that same sofa that the 4 of them were watching the movie on in the second episode. So they kind of reused the same set. Which subliminally, on a subconscious level, kind of opens the path to, you guys are going to you're going to the mountain.
Yeah, for sure. So it was baffling that they didn't follow up on that. I mean, there's all kinds of funny stuff. Like in the preceding episode, Czar of the Underworld, Clark had written a series of articles about this crime boss, and it was being adapted into a movie. And Clark and Inspector Henderson were flying out to Hollywood to consult on the movie. And the crime boss, who was the subject of the articles and the movie, tries to take out Clark before he and Henderson go to the airport. And someone takes a shot at Clark in the office. And of course, doesn't get him. But it was just so funny to me because Henderson is like, we gotta try to, get that guy. We gotta find who was shooting at you. And Clark is just like, no, we got a plane to catch. And Henderson goes along with it. This guy, Inspector Henderson, is just like, okay, no problem. Another thing though, going back, it's all like flooding out now, but I know we had talked about this, one of the early episodes. It might be the Broken Statues one, I forget, but the scene where Henderson and Clark are interrogating one of the bad guys, and Henderson says, like, he rolls up his sleeves, and he's like, we're going to do this the hard way. And Clark is right there for it. I mean, again, really like another sign of the times. I mean, sadly, we know that this still continues to this day, but the way that it was depicted and glorified in this was really kind of,
definitely pre-Miranda.
Yeah.
Because they don't put anything on screen, but Henderson goes, yeah, we'll do this the hard way. And he starts undoing his shirt and rolling up his sleeves. And then the next scene is the guy's got his hat off and he's kind of sweaty and disheveled. And Clark's just sitting there watching the whole thing. I mean, now, to your point, you said frequently Clark will be possibly a notch softer than Superman in tone.
Right.
But in that Ghost Wolf one, there's one scene where Lois and Clark are a little suspicious of the supervisor for the timber company, right? And Lois kind of goes, I got some questions about him and some concerns. And Clark is really tough. I mean, he's like Sam Spade. He goes, look, we'll get the answers, even if we have to dig them out the hard way, you know?
Yeah.
It's just fascinating.
Yeah, it's there are countless examples of the things that we're talking about. I want to circle back to sort of the shift that happened in season 2, but before that, because I keep meaning to bring this up and I keep forgetting, so I want to make sure I say it. Going back to this idea of the duality of Clark and Superman and how close they were, and that I agree with your assessment that Superman really was just an extension of Clark. I mean, it's a far cry from the Christopher Reeve performance in the Richard Donner movie, where, you can buy how people really wouldn't be able to recognize that they're the same person, but it's at the expense of the character of Clark, right? In those movies where he's such a caricature, he's so bumbling, he's such a cartoon. They really do Clark justice for the most part in Adventures of Superman. But one of the things that I was thinking about, and I know that this is a little nitpicky, but just bear with me on this little thought exercise, because this kept coming into my head. And I think this is a function of exactly what you said earlier. The fact that, generally, you weren't dealing with a ton of, like, a huge cast in most of these episodes, right? And among the allies, it's the same group, right? It's Lois, Jimmy, Perry, Henderson. And it got me thinking about, like, why does Clark typically separate his identities, right? It's like the common reasons, right? So that he can live a normal life, right? So that he can protect the people close to him. But in this show, he interacts with literally the same 3 to 4 people as both Clark and Superman every episode. He seems to have no life outside of being a reporter for the planet. It's like he's either at the planet working on a story or he's sleeping. Like, that's really it. And so it got me, it's like, at a certain point, it's like, why even bother? Like, I don't know it just complicates his life to have to keep up this charade. And again, I know it's part of the character. Like, believe me, I get all of that, but it's just like, mostly in the context of this show where he really is dealing with the same group of people in both identities. It's like, why? Why bother?
Anthony, it's funny. I thought about that, but the answer I came up with is, and I do want to dig on this, it's more consistency with the comics, right? I think that and you're absolutely right, in the context of the TV show, it's so confined. Why have a separate identity, right? Because, and there's 2 things I want to come back to, but I think, again, in season 2, when the people from DC National Comics went out to California and Whitney Ellsworth took a much more active role in being the story editor or the showrunner, I think they were concerned that if they made too radical a change in the TV show, it would limit their the 12-cent comic books that were being published at the time. I did think about that, though, because now the other thing I want to get into, and you cut me off if you want to say, look, Rich, I want to do this the next episode, but in the Panic in the Sky episode, and I would say Panic in the Sky from season 2 is my favorite, bar none. I could probably talk for 20 minutes on that alone. But there is one scene, and I want to give it away because it's both telling and humorous, but can I get into it now? You tell me. You're the driver.
Well, so let me say this. So you and I are going to do an episode of Digging Deeper, the official Digging for Kryptonite companion podcast, which will be out on my Patreon page in 1 week. And in that episode, we're going to shine a bright spotlight on Panic in the Sky. So we're really going to unpack that episode. But I mean, yeah, if there's like one thing in particular that you want to share.
The only thing I want to say, I'm going to adhere to your piloting of this. I'm with you. But for 10 seconds, there's one scene after something happens to Clark. Clark is in his bed and he's healing. You know, he was injured. But Perry and Lois and Jimmy are all there. And the fact that they couldn't put two and two together flabbergasts me, you know. It just cracked me up.
It's hilarious. There's also a great moment where, you know, Jimmy somehow off screen is able to get Clark, who's not a small man, from the shower where he's collapsed, fully clothed into his bed.
Into pajamas.
Yeah. But yeah, so you and I will break that episode down in full on the Digging Deeper episode. I hope people will tune in for that in a week. But yeah, I want to talk more about the identity, and also the one other point that I wanted to make about how much I enjoyed the types of stories that they told, because in a lot of instances, they were stories that really required Clark and Clark's investigative abilities. Like, there were numerous instances where Jimmy or another character would say, like, boy, I wish we could get a hold of Superman. And Clark would say, well, you know, there's really nothing, you know, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, like, there's not much Superman would be able to do here. Like, there's at least one episode where they're trying to find someone, and, you know, it wasn't the sort of thing that Superman necessarily would be able to do any better than Clark would as the report. So I like that there were a lot of stories where it really was about trying to figure something out, as opposed to, oh, we need Superman's powers. It's like, yes, ultimately they all needed to be rescued at the end of the episode. But before that, it really required, like Clark was called upon to use his, you know, deductive abilities, which I thought was cool. But as far as the identity, yeah, it's interesting. So my theory, and I know that the show doesn't support this, I know there's not evidence for it, but it makes me laugh, and I feel like it adds a pretty humorous layer to all of this. My theory is that Lois and Jimmy, maybe Perry, but Lois and Jimmy in particular, full on know that Clark and Superman are one and the same, and they just go along with it. And in my mind, you know, Clark will make his excuse, he'll go, and what we don't see is the extension of the scene where they're like, I can't believe he thinks we're falling for this, but it's like, let's just humor him. Like, he really helps us out. Like, it's okay. Again, I know there's no evidence for that, but it makes me laugh to think about it, because so there are a couple of layers to this. One is in terms of how the other characters, you know, what they think of Clark and Superman. So in a number of the early episodes, and I had talked to you about this, Lois in particular will make, like, snide remarks towards Clark about, like, in the Panic in the Sky episode in particular, at the beginning of it, you know, everyone's afraid of this asteroid that's coming, and she's looking out the window, and Perry comes in and he's like, where's Clark? And she's like, oh, he's probably hiding in a bunker somewhere. And there are numerous comments that, you know, characters will make about Clark's timidness. And that was always a little tough to reconcile, because as we've talked about, like, as Clark, he, for the most part, like, was pretty confident and decisive and authoritative, and was, like, always getting in on the action. So it felt like it was a little hard to reconcile that. But as I watched more episodes, I understood a little bit more about where they were coming from with that. Because there are a lot of instances where, you know, when he needs to change into Superman, you know, as Clark, he'll make some excuse of, like, oh, I'm going to go, you know, look around, which that's okay. But there's one episode in particular, Jet Ace, where,
yes, Perry's nephew,
Perry White's nephew is a fighter pilot, and he runs into trouble. And so, like, they're all, you know, listening on the radio as this guy's in great danger, and Clark is like, basically says, like, I can't stand, it's making me too upset, like, I have to go. So that's, like, one very clear example, right, of you know, of why they might think, like, well, there's no way this guy could be Superman, because look how nervous he gets. But I've noticed, like, especially in season 2, there are plenty of episodes where Lois and Jimmy are quite suspicious and actively try to set out to prove that Clark and Superman are one and the same. Do you remember some of those instances?
Yes. Oh, yes. Can I just do a non sequitur?
Sure.
I want to get your sense on this. And to your listeners, so we did chart out the different seasons, you know, and the tone, you know, and to me, there's really 3 big segments: season 1, season 2, and then the latter 4 seasons were more child-oriented and not as violent. But one thing that I found interesting is there were 2 different Lois Lanes. In season 1, there was an actress known as Phyllis Coates. And then for the other 5 seasons, Noel Neal, who was in some of the Kirk Alyn serials, came back as Lois Lane. And Anthony, I want to ask you, what is, you're seeing all this for the first time. Aside from how impressed we are with Clark, and in some ways you could also say this is maybe the adventures of Clark Kent, because again, Superman is the extension. But what was your perspective and your thoughts and your take on the two actresses and how they each portrayed Lois Lane?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, and that ties in with what I wanted to circle back to about the shift from season 1 to season 2, and I think it's fair to say that generally speaking, season 2 was a lot lighter, not as child-oriented as the color seasons would become, but definitely lighter than the first season, not as dark. Again, Superman wasn't punching bad guys for the most part. He would karate chop them or kind of knock their heads together. I noticed a lot of the stories had more of a human interest angle than they had before. So in fact, the first episode of the season, one of my favorites, 5 Minutes to Doom. Where they try to prove the innocence of a man who's sentenced to die, and again, it really comes down to the work of the reporters, and we only need Superman at the very end to get word to the governor for a stay of execution because the phone lines are down. So that's like the role that Superman plays in that episode, as he flies at the end. So I noticed more human interest stories. Again, definitely the violence was toned down. I noticed too that he used more of his powers, and that's probably a function of having the DC personnel you mentioned involved with the show, because in the first season, obviously he displays his strength and flight. And X-ray vision occasionally, but I noticed in season 2 way more X-ray vision, super hearing, super breath a few times.
Yes.
Again, those were some of the things. Jimmy became far more comedic in the second season, I noticed. And even the fact that he went from Jim to Jimmy, a subtle difference, but I think that spoke to the way the character was portrayed. I mean, in both seasons, you get an awful lot of jeepers and gee whizzes and gollies from the character, but even more so in the second season. And he always seemed to have this like wide-eyed, like goofy grin plastered on his face in a lot of those season 2 episodes. And so I think they really played Jimmy a lot more for comedic relief than they did in the first season.
I agree.
So those, like, big picture, those were a lot of the shifts that I noticed from season 1 to season 2. But maybe the biggest one of all really was the change in actress from Phyllis Coates to Noel Neal as Lois. And I like them both, but honestly, and I think my perception shifted as I fully watched both seasons. I give the edge to Phyllis Coates because her Lois was tough. Like, she was a real firecracker. She was tough as nails. I mean, she fought back. She was tough. And I think that I think that captures a little bit more of the essence of Lois. And I also think that it was a more progressive choice for that period of time to have a woman who was so strong and so front and center. Now, Noel Neal, her version of Lois is still a single, working gal, a go-getter. So I think she still accomplished a lot. And I like her Lois very much. But it's definitely a softer, more feminine Lois. She smiles a lot more. I noticed too, she and Jim in particular, and maybe this was a function of the friendship between the actors, but I noticed with Noel Neal and Jack Larson, they were a lot more, and not in an inappropriate way, but a lot more like handsy, like more touchy-feely. Like, I noticed a lot more hands on shoulders and things like that than you did in the previous season. So again, I think definitely a softer, more feminine Lois. Still tough, but not nearly as tough as Phyllis Coates was. And, there are a couple of instances, like there's an episode where Lois and Clark are at the diner, and just a throwaway line, but Lois is like, I really hope we get that raise so I can buy that new hat. And another episode where, I think the one where they go to the South American jungle, where she comes in and she models her outfit for Clark and Jimmy. And that felt like I could not see the Phyllis Coates Lois doing that. So now the last thing I'll say, and I want to turn this back over to you because I've been going on and on about this, but I could see how for audiences, especially audiences at the time in the 50s, I could see why the softer, more feminine Lois that Noel Neill depicted might be more appealing, might be more attractive to an audience. But, looking at it myself and just given the context of the time period and everything, I do give the edge to Phyllis Coates. But what do you think?
Once again, we're in sync. We're on the same frequency. In my view, Phyllis Coates was more true to what I envisioned Lois being. I mean, she was feisty. She was assertive. She was going to take risks to get the story and to do investigation. I think Noel Neill was more docile she was not as feisty, not as assertive. That's my take on the two. Now, as a child, I saw much more of the Noel Neill just because of volume. But in retrospect, I like more of the Phyllis Coates portrayal. Again, she seemed more independent, more feisty, more brassy, more assertive. I do want to say one tidbit for the listeners. So this is a credit to George Reeves, because early on in season 2, some of the directors really gave Noel Neill a hard time. They were very rude or brusque or just hard on her. And it might have been their friendship with Phyllis Coates, who chose not to come back for season 2. I think she might have had other professional commitments. So Phyllis Coates did not return. Noel Neill was there, and the directors were giving her a hard time. And finally, George Reeves got him off on the side and basically said, hey, look, lighten up, right? She doesn't deserve this. So he really stood up for her. And then something else happened with Robert Shane, who portrayed Inspector Henderson. There were some of the witch hunts in the mid-1950s, and I don't know the details. But apparently in his youth, Robert Shane might have had some affiliation in college or something with a social group or the communists or something. And he was really getting lambasted. And once again, George Reeves went to the producers and said, look, lighten up, right? Back off. So that's a credit, I think, to him as a human being. And it's not relevant to his portrayal, but I was just impressed with that morality and those ethics and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, for sure. I had heard those stories as well, and you like to hear that. Obviously, George Reeves, sadly met a tragic and very mysterious end, and that's actually one of the things that we'll pick up in our next episode as we talk about, a little bit about the later seasons, but also the legacy of the show, the legacy of George Reeves. Certainly anything that we, didn't get to in this episode that we meant to say we can include in the next one. Before we wrap up, because we've already been going for a little over an hour and a half, and I want to make sure we keep this under 2 hours. But I guess just to kind of close this out, because it's so worth mentioning. We talked about the stolen costume, which of course was really a standout of season 1. We're going to do our Patreon episode of Digging Deeper about Panic in the Sky. But I'd be remiss if we ended this episode without at least mentioning the face and the voice from season 2.
Thank you.
Would you like to do the honors of explaining the premise?
Okay. And to your listeners, you can tell I'm getting geeked up. In season 2, my 2 favorite episodes of the 100 plus, I think it was like 102 or 103 episodes, they're very close. One of them clearly is Panic in the Sky. And we're going to dig into that because that's my favorite, bar none. My second favorite is the face and the voice. And in this episode, a mob's boss gets this, I think, wrestler named Boulder to undergo surgery, plastic surgery and voice lessons where he becomes a twin to Superman. And he is an imposter. He impersonates Superman and commits robberies. Now, Anthony, I think we should dig into this more in our next one, but let me just tease the audience, right? So it, to your point, shows the humanity. I mean, one of the key themes in this is, at first, Clark is dismissive of this. Like, oh, it's just an imposter, no big deal. But then all of a sudden, someone says, well, we saw Superman fly away after he robbed the jewelry store. And that freaks Clark out. He gets really concerned that maybe he's air quotes sleepwalking, or something's happening that he's not consciously aware of. And it does portray the anxiety, the fear he has that he might be taking actions with his powers that he is not in control of. And I love how they digged into that. The other thing I loved is it really lets George Reeves show his acting muscles, because you could argue you've got at least 3 different personalities that Reeves is portraying. Clearly this imposter, and he does pander to the 1950s gangster D's and Do's and Brooklynese speaking. He has a fake nose on. So he gets to portray this imposter who's, not eloquent. He gets to portray Clark, who's full of anxiety that something is happening. And then he gets to be at the end that captures the bad guy. So I thought it let him stretch his acting muscles in different levels.
I feel the same. I enjoyed it so much. I mean, I don't know. I might even give the edge to that over Panic in the Sky. I'd have to rewatch them both together, but both phenomenal episodes. But yeah, with The Face and the Voice, I mean, really, yeah, from an acting standpoint, I think it let George Reeves do the most out of all of these episodes. And it was really impressive. It was a lot of fun. I think that the turn in it that I wasn't expecting, that I really found fascinating, was exactly what you just described, where Clark starts to doubt himself. Like, he goes to a doctor and he's like, is it possible that I'm doing this in my sleep? And so the doubt that they were able to cast on Clark within himself, that was really interesting to me and unexpected.
Agreed. That was very impactful. That was tremendously impactful.
Yeah.
And how it was also, I think, bold for the times, because there was a lot of stigma against seeking mental health, going to a doctor for your mental hygiene, your mental health. So I thought that was really progressive of the time, and also how quickly he went to a doctor. There were also some funny scenes in that exchange with the doctor when, when the doctor says, look, why don't you take a couple of days off? Oh, you're saying something is wrong with me. And the doctor goes, don't get that crazy idea. I go, now you think I'm crazy. I mean, it moved so quickly. And even Henderson at the end, when Superman comes into his office, he's like running around the desk to have the desk physically between him and Superman. So The Face and the Voice, I think, is the high point from a humor, and also giving Reeves the opportunity to stretch his acting muscles. And then there's other aspects of Panic in the Sky that I think are just so fascinating. More the identity. And that one scene in that one when Clark still has amnesia, but he's walking around his apartment wearing his Superman costume, but with his glasses on. And you can just tell he's struggling so much to try to figure out what his true identity is, who he is. I found that brief moment very, very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, throughout the episodes, there are a lot of moments of humor, some intentional, some not. I mean, you hit on this before, but, many episodes do end with either Clark or Superman, giving a knowing look and a wink to the camera. Clark will show up after Superman just saved the day, and they'll be like, oh, where were you? Or how'd you get here so fast? And he's like, oh, I really flew, and he'll give that wink. There's so many moments like that. Sometimes he slips up. I remember there's one episode where Superman says to Jimmy, I think it's the Lady in Black, and he's like, I have to get back to the office. And Jimmy's like, what do you mean, Superman? Like, what office? And he's like, oh, I got to help Kent with something at the office.
Or even the Czar of the Underworld. Oh, that's what they would have done to me.
Yeah. Oh, the Face and the Voice episode. I meant to bring this up because, everyone's trying to figure out what's going on initially, and I think it's Clark and Jimmy, and Jimmy's like, do you think he really did it? And Clark says, I know for a fact that Superman was in bed last night. And Jimmy doesn't follow up on that. But what, I mean, you would think that would raise some questions. I mean, I could see if Clark was like, I know there's no way he would do that. It's like, all right. He's like, I know for a fact Superman was in bed last night. And Jimmy's just like, okay.
Yeah.
There's so much great stuff. And I don't know, maybe in the next episode, maybe we can even do like a quick lightning round as we like rattle through some of the season 1 and season 2 episodes that we missed, and kind of point out some of the things that we really liked. I'll just say real fast, 2 episodes in season 2 that I was really curious to watch, and I enjoyed them, but I was a little bit let down. One was the defeat of Superman, where we finally get the introduction of kryptonite. And then Superman in Exile, where you had mentioned this before, where Superman is exposed to radiation. He becomes radioactive and he has to exile himself. I was hoping for more of an opportunity for Reeves to really kind of stretch the acting muscles and depict a little bit more of maybe the fear that Superman would presumably be feeling. I didn't feel like we quite got that so much in those episodes, but they were still interesting. And again, they put Clark through his paces in a way that was different than we had seen before. And for the defeat of Superman, my favorite aspect of that was the fact that after all of these episodes of Clark as Superman always rescuing Lois and Jimmy, we got one where they had to rescue him from the kryptonite. And I liked that. And I thought that was such a nice touch that they had his back when it counted and when they were able to return the favor to him. So I thought that was really cool.
Point. Good point. Oh, excellent point.
All right. So it's been an hour and 45 minutes. So I think this is more than a good enough place to stop here. But Rich, this has been even more fun than I thought it would be. It's really been a blast to do this. And I'm so happy that between the Digging Deeper and the next Digging for Kryptonite, we still have 2 more episodes to talk about Adventures of Superman.
Oh, it couldn't be better. I mean, again, thank you. I never would have delved into this. I never would have explored this had you not suggested it. And again, I was cavalier. I figured I'll just do it off memory. And I'll talk about, that Little League game and when I first learned about the origin. This has really, really helped me. So I've derived great enjoyment from studying these things and like reading up on the internet. It's expanded and it's enhanced my appreciation for the character and also my appreciation for George Reeves. I tip my hat to him. Listen, had we not done this, it just would have been a footnote in something I knew,
Good. Well, I'm glad you've enjoyed this. I've had a blast. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who listened or watched this episode. So Rich and I will be back in 1 week on my Patreon page for an episode of Digging Deeper, all about Panic in the Sky, Rich's favorite episode, and one of my favorite episodes as well. And then we'll be back here on Digging for Kryptonite in 2 weeks with the second part of our discussion of Adventures of Superman, where we talk about the legacy of the show. So I hope that you'll tune in for all of that. And until then, remember, it's about what you do. It's about action. Digging for Kryptonite is a Flat Squirrel production. Art by Greg Schiegel, music by Basic Printer. If you like what you heard, be sure to listen to My Comic Shop History, available on most major podcast platforms. Sign up for exclusive additional content, including the Digging for Kryptonite companion podcast at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato, and watch my documentary film, My Comic Shop Country, out now on Apple TV and Amazon.